Hello, my name is Professor Hudson, and you are about to view narrated PowerPoint lectures for Chapter 11 on Mendelian Genetics Concepts. These lectures are part of Module 7, Part 1. There will be another set of lectures for Module 7, Part 2 on non-Mendelian genetics. Let us begin. For this first set of Module 7, Part 1 narrated PowerPoint lectures, we will focus on the following concepts and topics. What is the physical basis of inheritance? How are the principles of inheritance discovered? How are single traits inherited? How are multiple traits inherited? And how are human genetic disorders inherited? This slide lists several important ideas about inheritance. Genetics is the scientific study of heredity. Heredity is the transmission of traits from one generation to the next. A trait is a variation of a heritable feature. Inheritance is the process by which the traits of organisms are passed to their offspring. Mendel helped to figure out how inheritance works. A gene is a unit of heredity that encodes information needed to produce proteins, cells, and entire organisms. The location of a gene on a chromosome is called its locus. Plural is loci. An organism's genetic makeup is its genotype. An organism's physical traits are its phenotype. The genotype dictates what the phenotype will be. You cannot see someone's genotype. However, you can infer what's in their genotype based on what they look like, which is their phenotype. Genotype is what's in the genes, and phenotype is what you actually see physically expressed based on the genes or genotype. This slide shows a pair of homologous chromosomes. Remember, a pair of homologous chromosomes consists of the chromosome that was inherited from the mother and the chromosome that was inherited from the father in a diploid organism. Homologous chromosomes carry the same kinds of genes for the same characteristics. Genes for the same characteristics are found at the same loci or location on both homologous chromosomes. Genes for a characteristic found on homologous chromosomes may not be identical. When they're not identical, the alternative versions of the genes found at the same loci are called alleles. Alleles originally arose from mutations, which are changes in the nucleotide sequence of genes. If a mutation occurs in a cell that becomes a sperm or egg, it can be passed on from parent to offspring. Most mutations occurring in the DNA of an organism initially appeared in the reproductive cells. New mutations may have occurred in reproductive cells of the organism's own parents, but that is quite a rarity. Let's go back to where we talked about an organism's two alleles may be the same or different. Each cell carries two alleles or two versions of a gene per characteristic. One version comes from mom and one version comes from dad. One is on the chromosome from mom and one is on the chromosome from dad. If both chromosomes of the homologous pair carry the same allele or the same form of the gene at a certain location, we say that individual is homozygous. If the homologous chromosomes carry different alleles at a given location, the organism is what we call heterozygous at that location, also known as a hybrid. If you look in this figure, you will see three gene pairs. At the very top of the chromosome in orangish pink color are two genes, one on one chromosome and one on the other chromosome. These two are homologous heterozygous chromosomes, remember, one from mom and one from dad. These two genes appear to be homozygous, which means the one from mom and the one from dad are the same. The next set of genes in purple also appear to be homozygous. However, if you look further down on this chromosome, you see a third set of genes, one in dark green and one in light green. These two genes, while they encode for the same trait, they have different versions. And so we consider this person to be heterozygous at this particular gene location. If, for example, these gene pair encoded for, say, eye color, maybe the dark green allele would represent the brown-eyed version, and maybe the light green represented the blue-eyed version. Ultimately, what eye color this person would express would be dictated by which version of these different alleles is the dominant one. But we will talk more about that later. This slide is just showing another view of a pair of homologous chromosomes, one from dad in blue and one from mom in red. And it is showing, using letters, the genes at the various locations on the chromosomes. For the P gene, in this example, this person is homozygous dominant. The capital letter is used to designate that this person got two dominant versions of this particular gene, one from mom and one from dad. For the A gene, this person is homozygous recessive. Note the lowercase letter designate the recessive version of the gene. Both mom and dad gave a recessive for this particular gene. For gene B, note this person is what we call heterozygous. They received the dominant version of gene B from mom, note the capital B, and then they received a recessive version of gene B at the location from dad. This is heterozygous. Here's a question you can use for review. Please note that you do not have to record this answer and you will not input it in a quiz. The questions in this lecture you will see are strictly for your own review and do not need to be inputted in any quiz. See, can you answer this question based on what you've learned? The word blank refers to the alleles that an individual receives at fertilization. Would that be genotype, phenotype, karyotype, or lenotype? Choose the correct answer. If you selected genotype, you were correct. Here's another review question. Which of the following is a phenotype? Is it the big T and the little t in A? Is it heterozygous? Is it short? Or is it the big T? Which one of these choices refers to a term or something you would see if someone was talking about a phenotype? Choose the correct answer. If you chose C as in cat, short, as a phenotype, you were correct. Choice A, choice B, and choice D all refer to the genotype. The only choice here that refers to a phenotype, or what you can physically see, would be choice C for short. Now let us continue. Some more important ideas. Genes and alleles. As we've already mentioned, every individual has two genes for a trait. Genes have two variant forms called alleles. The locus or loci refers to the location of the genes on the chromosome. Alleles are alternate versions of genes. If you are homozygous for a particular gene, that means you receive two identical alleles. If you are heterozygous for a particular gene, that means you receive two different alleles. If you are heterozygous, which means you have two different alleles for a gene pair, then the dominant allele will determine your physical appearance, while the recessive allele has no noticeable effect on the appearance. Let's review. Question 3. When an organism has two different alleles at a gene locus, it is referred to as, would it be A, homozygous recessive, B, homozygous dominant, or C, heterozygous? Choose the correct answer. If you chose heterozygous, you are correct. When an organism has two different alleles at a gene locus, it is referred to as heterozygous. Here's another review question. Which of the following represents a heterozygous genotype? Choose the correct answer. Would it be A, the two capital T's, B, the capital T and lowercase t, C, the two lowercase t's, and D, tall? Which one of these refers to a heterozygous genotype? If you chose B with the capital T and the lowercase t, you are correct. That refers to a heterozygous genotype. A would actually be a homozygous dominant genotype. C would be a homozygous recessive genotype. And D, for tall, that would actually be a phenotype. Let us continue. Now we're going to talk about how the principles of inheritance were discovered. Gregor Johann Mendel, an Austrian monk, discovered the common patterns of inheritance and many essential facts about genes, alleles, and the distribution of alleles in gametes and zygotes during sexual reproduction. He chose the edible pea plant for his experiments, which took place in the monastery garden. Mendel's background allowed him to see patterns in the way characteristics were inherited. The secret to his success was that he chose the right organisms to work with, he designed and performed his experiments correctly, and he was really good at analyzing the data properly. He was not the first person to study genetics, but he was the first person to perform experiments by correctly applying good scientific research steps. Let's look at the pea plant, which was the subject of his study. Pea plants have qualities that make them a good organism for studying inheritance. Pea flowers have stamens, which produce the male pollen, which is the sperm, and pea flowers have carpels, which is the female structure that houses the ovaries, which produce the eggs. Pea flower petals enclose both male and female flower parts and prevent entry of pollen from another pea plant. Because of their structure, pea flowers naturally self-fertilize. Pollen from the stamen of a plant transfers to the carpel of the same plant, where the sperm fertilizes the plant's eggs. Mendel was able to mate two different plants by hand. The female parts were dusted with pollen from other selected plants. This slide shows the 7 characteristics of pea plants studied by Mendel. Unlike previous researchers, Mendel chose a simple experimental design. He chose to study individual characteristics that had unmistakable different forms. He employed numerical analysis and only looked at one trait at a time. He began to see patterns emerging. Let's stop here.